An interesting fight. At 135 pounds, we have a guy who was the unranked champ before Sean O'Malley in this division, and that is Raoni Barcelos. He's taking on La Mangosta. It is Victor Henry. And listen, we talked about this fight a number of weeks ago because Raoni Barcelos is one of those guys that nobody wants to fight. And whether they don't or the fight falls out, it seems to happen a lot to Raoni Barcelos. So he gets what he takes, and he takes Victor Henry on short notice. Now, Henry out, there's COVID protocols and such, so they moved this card UFC 270. We talked about this fight in extensive detail, so we'll throw it on back to that video, update the odds, and give you a final pick and prediction on this one. Absolute banger of a fight. Coming up this weekend, we have Josh Barnett's guy. We have La Mangosta, Victor Henry, coming in here on short notice, replacing Trevin Jones, taking on Raoni Barcelos. Matt, when I look at this fight, it reminds me of one of my favorite songs right now. It's called The Payback by James Brown. And at the start of the song, I'm not going to do a James Brown impression, but it goes, hey, gotta pay back. Revenge. I'm mad. Gotta get back. And you know why? Because for Raoni Barcelos, you look at the tape, this guy hadn't lost in 7 years and 9 fights. And listen, Sean O'Malley thinks it's the thing du jour to go, I'm the unranked champ. Well, that's cool, and that's cute. I have 2 Brazilians that were unranked champs forever. Leonardo Santos at 155 before his last 2 fights, and Raoni Barcelos before he took on Timur Valiev. And if you want to get crazy about that fight, Raoni knocked down Timur twice in the second round. That's a 10-8, and he would have had a draw, but it's a majority decision because one judge scored at 28-28, and the other 2 scored at 29-28 for Valiev. And that was the trouble. Barcelos kind of gave away the first round. In the second round, he goes ham. And then in the third round, Raoni didn't have the steam left. So for me, it was very disappointing, I guess, when you look at that fight. Because Raoni, again, another favorite, another big opportunity, another one where who wants to fight him? When you are the uncrowned champ of the unranked fighters, nobody wants to fight you. Raoni's one of those guys. Now, for him, Trevin Jones wanted that fight. Victor Henry ultimately gets it. And the craziest part about this, these guys are 3 days apart in birthdays. How crazy is that?
It really is insane. Like, when we put on our graphics, this is their UFC debut, this is their MMA debut, this is their birthday. This caught me very much off guard because, Raoni was always that fighter who I said if he was only 3 years younger, if we had 3 more years of his prime, then maybe he finally could reach those heights that maybe we set for him, or maybe the ones that he rightfully achieved on his own, because Barcelos is, like you said, he was that unranked king.
He was supposed to fight, again, before that fight that he had his last time out to lose. He was supposed to fight Marab, he was supposed to fight Rafael Sansa, who was also on this card, and he was supposed to fight Marcelo Rojo. But going into that last booking with Rojo, Barcelos got COVID, then it was delayed, and then he had the fight against Valiev. I just wonder, at the age, with the COVID, I just wonder if there are any lasting effects based on the cardio in that fight.
I do worry a little bit, but we do famously say, like, every single one of these videos that you can't really, say much about it. That's true. This is my issues with Raoni Barcelos, and then these are all the reasons why I'm definitely going to pick him this weekend.
I got a page of notes on Victor Henry.
Perfect. With Raoni, he almost had like the Jourdain, formerly known as Calderwood, now would happen to him, where he was promised this ranked opportunity all these times. He ends up not getting the ranked opponent, and then he lost, similar to Jennifer Maia, when she took on Calderwood. Calderwood was promised the title shot, thought, no, I'll get there anyways, I'll stay busy in the meantime, and ended up coming short. Now, this is a very, very important fight, because like you would set it up, it's revenge time for Raoni Barcelos. Like, this is when you either go out there and you destroy Victor Henry in the first 2 minutes because you are that borderline top 15 guy fighting a guy on a week's notice, or we do start to see the cracks in your game. We do see a 34 going on 35-year-old at bantamweight who, like you mentioned, is coming off COVID. There are a lot of question marks around Raoni Barcelos.
COVID before the Valiev fight.
Exactly. But what I do like about Barcelos is that he has a very unique game for this division. He's got phenomenal Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I could talk about that for ages, but he's got great striking to back it up. He's one of those unique fighters, though, who, if his wrestling was 10% better, he probably would be in the top 15 already, because if he had that one transition to, okay, maybe you're a little bit better than me at striking, fine, that's no big deal. My jiu-jitsu will win out. Or if there were other guys, I guess I can't really name many, who have the jiu-jitsu credibility of a guy like Barcelos, but you get the idea. If his wrestling was just a little bit better, then I think he already would have had that opportunity. And that's why this fight's going to be so interesting against who, like you said, Josh Barnett's guy, Victor Henry, finally getting this opportunity.
Well, this is the craziest part about it. So you always hear about Machida Karate, you hear about Lyoto training in California, he's got Shinzo, but at the same time he trains at King's MMA. MMA, and I could go on and on about Rafael Cordero and everybody else that trains at King's. But then there's another gym. There's CMMA, California Mixed Martial Arts and Fitness, and that's where Victor Henry trains. He's a coach, and he's also the team captain. Now, we've heard of coaches and team captains. Daniel Cormier is probably the most popular of them, but that's where Victor Henry trains with. And you know who's one of the number one guys that he trains with, and the reason I make the Machida connection? He trains with Weber Almeida, the prospect that you should definitely be paying attention to over with Bellator, because Weber Almeida is a wicked striker, and he has a great ground game of his own. He is the next Machida if Goto Yamauchi wasn't for me. But I look at this fight where Victor Henry's a guy that competes with Quintet, and I have a lot of different examples of that. But this is a guy that's well-traveled in not a way that most people from California travel, because he's competed extensively in Japan. He's had plenty of fights with Pancrase, with Deep, also with Ryzen, and you look at the fights over there. I mean, he fights, who is it? The Anzac fighter in Trent Girdham, finishes him in the third round. Trent's a striker. Still a good way to draw that fight out, win it that way. Fights Masanori Kanehara, a guy who has a win over Alex Caceres in the UFC. What does he do in that fight? Did you watch that fight?
I did.
First round, gets taken down, gets pretty well dominated. Now, it was a little bit like Poirier in the guard in the first bit, and then at the end, Kanehara gets the back, and listen, it goes from round to round, but I went, oh boy. For this jiu-jitsu player in Victor Henry, a guy, he's superb at jiu-jitsu. Like, both of these guys actually match up very, very well together with Barcelos and Henry. There's little intangibles that make differences, but for style, this makes for a great fight. And if you look at that Kanehara fight, okay, he gives up the positions, then he gets his back taken. Second round comes out, he goes right cross, knockdown, finishes the fight, and then just lets out a yelp. So
he has a very short memory, and that's a great thing to have in MMA. They tell you that in sports your whole life growing up. Have a short memory. If something bad happened, just forget about it. Move on from that. That's a great thing that Victor Henry has been able to show.
Last fight out, wins the LXF Bantamweight Championship over Albert Morales. Well, he was in the UFC. Pretty good there. He also lost to Patchy Mix and Bellator, but Albert Morales has that pedigree of fights that you want, and that fight was a brawl. He has 2 fights against Denis Lavrentiev over with Paris FC as well as RCC, 1 win, 1 loss, both by decision. But Matt, the fights that made a lot of sense to me. He has a knockout win over Anderson Dos Santos before Dos Santos went to the UFC. Before that,
we talked about a lot for having a padded record, but
beat Kyler Phillips by split decision after Kyler was off of his fight from Contender Series, The Ultimate Fighter. I mean, still, by split, that means something. And then Yuki Matoyo was another one of those ones that I looked at and went, he has had an impact on MMA. So I look at it. He beats Kanehara in MMA. He loses to him over with Quintet. But I absolutely love everything that I've seen. The evolution in his game, the little tricks that he's been able to bring in. And I think he's one of those veterans that you're not just going to see for 1 fight, 2 fight. I think you're going to see 4 or 5 from Victor Henry in the UFC.
I've got bad news, though. He's making his UFC debut on, 5 days notice against Raoni Barcelos? 6 days?
It's not a lot of days.
It's not a lot of days. And this is my problem. Even if I think you would have a very good shot with a full training camp, you don't have a full training camp, and that's the issue. Raoni Barcelos truly is the 16th ranked bantamweight, or he was at least for a short little period of time. And I do believe that he's going to get back on track. I think the guy who fought his last fight was maybe not, I don't want to say over-aggressive or over-emotional, but you could tell that he thinks he belongs in the top 15, and I think he sees this as a great opportunity to sort of reintroduce himself to the average MMA fan. And you mentioned this, but it has to be said again. You can't really look at this as like a prospect coming in. Henry, not only is it a prospect, but he's only 3 days younger and he's had more pro fights. So I don't look at him being the much fresher guy who hasn't taken a lot of damage because, again, and I'm glad you brought it up, Henry will make fights closer than they probably should be at some points throughout his fights, and that does worry me. He will get into brawls sometimes and then shoot for the takedown. He will take some ground and pound and then try to escape. There's always sort of a process in one of his matchups where he's the one taking damage, and I do not like that being one of your skills when you're fighting a guy like Barcelos.
If Barcelos tries to take this one down to the mat, nope. I like Raoni on the ground. I do not like him on the ground against Victor Henry, man. You watch the way this guy's able to transition, sweep out of bad positions. He is one of those guys. So for Barcelos, he's a guy that fought, again, some of those unranked guys, padded his record, fought guys that, he was supposed to beat, but he beat them in impressive fashion. And if you go back and you watch some of his fights, to me, That Kalitaha fight, you want to get excited about Raoni Barcelos, and this fight in particular against Victor Henry. I think that's the perfect fight to watch. Or Victor Henry goes out there, pitter-patters with a little bit of a volume game, and you look at the Timur Valiev fight, which was incredibly close, and you can see certain paths to victory. So when I look at this one in the odds now, Barcelos open a minus 350 favorite. He's a minus 417. For Henry, open a plus 285. He's a plus 315. If we look at the Tapology votes, Matt, surprise to us there, to everybody out there, I'm going to set the over-under at 80% Barcelos.
I'm going to say over.
You're going to say over? Look at that. 852 total votes, 92% Barcelos, 75% by decision for the 8% that have Henry, 47% by decision, 25% by knockout. It is tough to beat pitter-patter Barcelos, especially when he brings in his wrestling. That's going to be the interesting part that plays into Victor Henry's game with his jiu-jitsu. So I can't wait for this fight. I think it's going to be a great one.
This should be a great fight. And the point I want to bring up about Raoni Barcelos is that to me, he feels a little bit like Mirbek Taisumov, where there was a portion throughout the prime of his career where there was always a by the way. And I understand for very different reasons for both fighters, but they were kind of robbed of many of their prime years in the UFC. And then when they were able to get some sort of a regular schedule, it was past when they were at their peak. And with Barcelos, maybe he is past his peak. Maybe his last fight was against a really talented fighter, which is more what I believe in. But with Barcelos, it will be interesting because if he does lose this fight, then I feel like prime Raoni Barcelos is dead and gone. But if he is able to beat Victor Henry, which I expect him to be able to do, he's got to get a top 15 opponent at some point, just based off principles. Like, Mike Connolly was an all-star last year, even though he probably didn't deserve it. It was just like, hey, you were really good for like 15 years. We'll give you one just so you can have this. For Raoni Barcelos, there has to be like a lifetime achievement top 15 opponent for him.
It's like Nick Suzuki last year. Bring the Canadians to the Cup final. You're an all-star this year because it's a participation award. And I'm a Canadians fan to say that. When I look at this one, there's a couple of things I have to say. Mirbek Taisumov loves wearing an American flag New York Yankees hat on Instagram all the time.
Weird.
It's all he wears, and it's weird that I know that, but it's true. Go look at it. But when I look at this fight, I think Barcelos is just a step ahead in almost every area. If Victor Henry goes out there, gets a front choke, man, that would be awesome, but I just don't necessarily see it happening. So for me, I also have Barcelos in this fight, but the odds are too cooked for me to make any play on this one. Both of us going with Brazil's Barcelos to get the win, and we have a great card coming up. If you like this fight between a couple of very dynamic bantamweights, check out the co-main event between Brandon Moreno and Davison Figueiredo. It is movement and volume at the highest level at 125, and in the main event, Gane looking to unify that belt, taking on former teammate Francis Ngannou. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.